Hi, Susan. How are you tonight? Hi, Lana. How are you doing? Nice to see you both. I know there are some more people here, but I cannot see you in the comments section yet. Oh, hi, Sharon Anthony Connors. Nice to see you. I hope you're all doing well tonight. I'm certainly doing well. I'm looking forward to getting into Bernie's democracy workplace plan, which is, of course, the plan for tonight is to go through Bernie's democracy workplace plan. I think it's very exciting, at least to me. So let me make sure it will show on the screen. And then I'll share it with you. Here we are. You should be seeing it now. So the plan is fairly extensive. As I'm sure you've been noticing, Bernie's plans are extensive. He starts off by saying some things that are pretty well known and some other things that are not so well known. He says first, it was the trade union movement that built the middle class in this country, and it's the trade union movement that is going to rebuild the middle class in America once again. And he says the Bernie Sanders administration will make it a priority to restore workers' rights to bargain for better wages, for benefits, and for working conditions. He says that is what the workplace democracy plan is all about. And that gives you a hint of what it's going to be about. It's the American idea of trade unionism. Now, that is, the workers have the rights to bargain, and what they traditionally bargain for is to have higher wages and better benefits and good working conditions. So notice that sentence does not say that the workplace democracy plan is about sharing ownership, okay, or having workers cooperatives, anything like that. And so that's a hint as to what he's going to be offering here. Anyway, he goes on. There's no doubt that that union membership is good for workers. He points out, okay, that union workers earn 22% more on average than non-union workers do. And he says in America today, 72% pay of union workers have a defined benefit type of pension plan that guarantees an income in retirement compared to just 14% of non union workers. Wow, what a big difference that is, isn't it? And he says union workers are also half as likely to be victims of health and safety violations. half as likely to be victims of wage threat, and 18% more likely to have health coverage. Again, very, very big differences. And then he says something that most of us, I think, have come to realize is true, and that is the decline in unions has fueled rising inequality in America. He points out that corporate profits are at an all-time high, while wages as a percentage of the economy are near an all-time low. And he goes on, the middle class is disappearing, and the gap between the very rich and everyone else. Excuse me a second, I think my camera has gone south. So I'm going to have to fix that. Okay, my camera went south. I think it's back, hopefully. Yes, I'm back. And you can both see me and hear me. And I'm still live streaming, so that's very good. So back to the plan. He says the middle class is disappearing and the gap between the very rich and everyone else is growing wider and wider. And this has been one of the major themes of Bernie's appeals and his campaigns since 2015 and before, okay, as well, but especially significant when he began to run for the presidency. He says there are many reasons for the growing inequality in our economy, but one of the most significant reasons for the disappearing middle class is that the rights of workers to join together and bargain for better wages, okay, and benefits and working conditions have been severely undermined. And I say I completely agree with this. I've been watching it all my life. I've been watching it since I was 8 years old, and Taft-Hartley, okay, was passed, which created the possibility of having right-to-work states, and which to some degree undermined the right to strike. Okay, now we have to remember that unions were still very powerful in the late 1940s. It was a time when unions were still expanding. The AFL-CIO was getting stronger, and unions have a lot of influence over elections. But they still were facing a rising tide of anti-union sentiment, okay, as well, especially in the southern states, where the right-to-work movement was getting started and was gaining ground, and where the Republican takeover of Congress for 2 years created a fertile opportunity for the Republicans to pass an anti-union bill like Taft-Hartley. So, going back to the plan, looking at the most recent statistics, when workers become interested in forming unions, 75% of private sector employers hire outside consultants to run anti-union campaigns. 63% force employees to attend closed-door meetings to hear anti-union propaganda. And 54% of employers threaten workers in such meetings. Further, an employee who engages in union organizing campaigns has a 1 in 5 chance of getting fired. Nearly 60% of employers threaten to close or relocate their businesses if workers elect to form a union. Even when workers overcome these enormous obstacles and win elections, more than half of workers who vote to form a union don't have a union contract a year later. And 37% still do not have a first contract 2 years after the election due to loopholes in the labor laws. And then Bernie's campaign says, when Bernie Sanders is president, we'll make it easier, not harder, for workers to join unions by implementing the Workplace Democracy Plan and establishing a national goal to double membership in unions during his first term in office. And the plan says Bernie's pro-union plan would, the first bullet point, provide unions the ability to organize through a majority sign-up the process, allowing the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, to certify a union if it receives the consent of the majority of eligible workers. Under Bernie's plan, when a majority of workers in a bargaining unit sign valid authorization cards to join a union, they will have a union. If employers refuse to negotiate in good faith, we, that is, a Sanders administration, we will impose strong penalties on those companies. Okay, this provision, the first one, is popularly known as the card check provision. When Obama won in 2008 and took over the government in early 2009, he had promised that a card check bill would be passed. He ran on this in his campaign. Once he got into office, though, the card check promise was forgotten, and the unions never got a card check bill, even though they delivered invaluable support in 2008 to the election of the president. Obama simply broke his promise. But still, even then, the union movement failed to hold him accountable in future elections, failed to hold the Democrats accountable, because, of course, they were more afraid of the Republicans. It was a classic case of, well, where are they going to go? Okay. So, will Bernie pass a card check bill? You bet he would. Is Warren likely to pass a card check bill? I wouldn't bet a plug nickel on that. Next bullet point. And that is to enact first contract provisions to ensure companies cannot stop a union from forming by denying a first contract. And he says employers would be required to begin to negotiate within 10 days of receiving a request from a new union. If no agreement is reached after 90 days of having a negotiation, the parties can request to enter a compulsory mediation process. If no first contract is reached after 30 days of having a mediation process, the parties would have a contract settlement through binding arbitration. I presume, with a federal arbitrator, a labor arbitrator. In other words, with arbitration monitored by the NLRB. It won't be one of these fake kinds, okay, of arbitrations that owe much to the corporations that force people to sign arbitration contracts. Okay, next bullet point. Bernie's administration, okay, would eliminate the right to work for less. He said Bernie's plan would repeal Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act, which has been in place, by the way, since 1948, if I recall correctly, which has allowed 28 states to pass laws, okay, that eliminate the ability of unions to collect dues from those who benefit from the contracts and the activities of the unions, undermining the unions the representation of the workers. Okay, what does this address? For years now, in right-to-work states, there have been laws that say that it is not compulsory to join a union, even though you benefit from contracts which have actually been won by a union. So this gives people the ability to be freeloaders, and it has impaired organizing severely, especially through the South and in many of the Western states as well. 28 of the states of the Union are actually right-to-work states now. Okay. And this has crippled the growth of unions in those states. Okay, because if you have 10,000 people in a firm, and say you have a majority of workers, 6,000 who vote to have a union, and the union goes out then and works to negotiate a contract and gets a contract from the company, then 4,000 workers are going to be freeloaders, having the benefits of the contract while doing nothing to support the unions at all. Now, this is obviously a very unfair situation. Now, some of you are going to say, okay, well, individuals have rights. If they don't want to join a union, they shouldn't have to join a union. Well, this is a case where if you undermine the basis of a collective simply by withdrawing from the collective, then in most cases, you're just not going to have the collective. If you need the collective to raise wages and to improve benefits and to lead to a stronger middle class, you're not going to have a stronger middle class. So you have to decide what is to be preferred, the rights of the individuals who come together and who join these unions, okay, or the rights of the individuals who don't agree to step into the unions. It seems to me the rights of the majority in this particular situation, in other words, that's the majority, okay, of individuals. So even if you're concerned about the rights, okay, of individuals, it seems to me the rights of the individuals who join the union supersede the rights of the lesser number, okay, of individuals who do not want to join the union. That's especially true because federal law mandates that even people who do not join a union are nevertheless entitled to all the benefits as if they did join a union. Anyway, under Bernie's plan, companies will no longer be able to ruthlessly exploit workers by misclassifying them as independent contractors or deny them overtime by falsely calling them a supervisor. Of course, this has been an abuse of the labor laws widespread in private business today. And that's cost workers lots and lots of overtime. When Bernie is president, his administration will end the ability of corporations to misclassify workers as independent contractors or to label them as a supervisor. Also, by the way, when you misclassify people as independent contractors, then we all know you don't have to give them fringe benefits, which is the game that a lot of corporations today are playing in order to exploit workers. It's a game, okay, that Uber plays, for example. It's a game, okay, that Amazon plays. Make sure that employers can no longer use franchisee or contractor arrangements to avoid responsibility and uh, 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 the okay, and avoid also liability for workers by codifying the Browning-Ferris joint employer standard into law. What that means is when Bernie's president, his administration will make clear that a worker can have more than one employer. If a company can decide who to hire and who to fire and how much to pay an employee at a franchise, that company will be considered a joint employer along with the owner of a particular franchise. And both employers must engage in collective bargaining over the terms and conditions of employment. So that's another element of fair treatment that Bernie is going to implement. Then further, something workers have wanted for many, many, many years. Give federal workers the right to strike. In December, Trump shut down the federal government for 35 days, the longest in history, depriving over 800,000 workers of their paychecks. And then he had an insult to injury when he deprived hundreds of thousands of TSA agents, air traffic controllers, IRS employees, employees of the Coast Guard, and other federal government employees by forcing them all to work without pay and without any recourse. Under current law, federal employees are not guaranteed the same labor rights as workers in the private sector. While they have the ability to unionize, they're prohibited from going on strike. Under this plan, federal workers would have the right to strike. And of course, implicitly, then they would have the right to negotiate contracts that would guarantee their pay when the federal government shuts down. This, of course, is an enormous importance to any federal worker. On this ground alone, it seems to me that every federal worker should be voting for Bernie. But That's just me, right? It's just one person's opinion. Make sure every public sector union in America has the freedom to negotiate. When Bernie's president, he's going to sign the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act of 2019 to guarantee the right of public employees to organize and bargain collectively for better wages, for benefits, and working conditions in states like Iowa that currently do not offer these fundamental protections. He's going to require companies that merge to honor existing union contracts. Right now, that right, does not exist. So, when two firms come together, instead of honoring the existing union contract with the workforce, the merged company can try to impose substantial cuts to benefits that employees had already earned. And they can reward the executives who accomplished the merger with many millions of dollars in essentially merger bonuses. Under Bernie's plan, companies would no longer be able to abrogate their union contracts when they merge, with other companies. The merged companies will be stuck with the union contracts. Now, I hear a lot from the companies that contracts are sacred when the interests of the companies happen to be at stake. But when the interests of their unions are at stake, or when the pension rights of employees, are at stake, then all of a sudden, when companies merge, all kinds of things can be done to union contracts, and to pension benefits, and none of the management talks about the sacredness of contracts. Bernie's going to stop this hypocrisy. Further bullet point in this program is to deny federal contracts to employers that pay poverty wages, outsource jobs overseas, engage in the practice, of union busting, but deny good benefits and pay CEOs outrageous compensation packages. So here what he's addressing is the situation we see now, where many CEOs in some of our largest companies can earn from 350 to 500 times what the median worker in the company earns. What Bernie says here is that he will issue an executive order to prevent companies from receiving federal contracts that outsource jobs overseas, that pay workers less than $15 an hour, and have no benefits, refuse to remain but neutral in union organizing efforts, pay executives more than 150 times more than average workers, hire workers to replace the striking workers, or close businesses after workers vote to unionize the businesses. Now, the prohibitions in this bullet point, I think, are very powerful. I would say, however, that I think it's time to put in a higher minimum wage for federal contracts than for other kinds of contracts. For years and years, people have been paid far too little on federal contracts, and it's only fair that they begin to catch up now. Okay, so I think that perhaps $18 an hour on federal contracts or $20 an hour on federal contracts is more appropriate for companies seeking federal contracts. I also think that to pay executives 150 times more, okay, than average workers is being too gentle with these very highly paid executives. I see no reason to pay the CEOs more than the Japanese standard, which is to say maybe 35 to 40 times more than the median worker in the company. Okay, the average worker is a little too vague, and if it were the mean, okay, that was used, then you'd have a situation where the average would actually be pulled up by higher salaries for the CEO, okay, and the executives uh, in a company. So the median is a better measure of what the average worker is actually getting paid. So I'd say 35 to 40 times more than the average, and I propose such a change to this particular provision. Now, no doubt that would lead to an exodus of CEOs from companies trying to get federal contracts. In my view, that would be a very good thing for the federal contracting business. Anyway, next bullet point: ban the permanent replacement of striking workers. And he says this plan will outlaw once and for all the permanent replacement of workers who go on strike. Next, he wants to protect the pensions, okay, of workers. As president, Bernie will protect and expand the pension benefits of employees in both the public and the private sector. And he says, because of a 2014 change in law instituted in the dead of night and against the strong opposition of Senator Sanders, it is now legal to cut the earned pension benefits of more than 1.5 million workers and retirees in multi employer pension plans. And Bernie says, as president, he's going to sign, okay, an executive order to impose a moratorium on future pension cuts and would reverse the cuts to retirement benefits that have already been made. Further, President Sanders will fight to implement the Keep Our Pension Promises Act he first introduced in 2015 to prevent the pensions of up to 10 million Americans from being cut. Instead of asking retirees to take a massive cut in their pension benefits, Bernie will make multi employer plans solvent by closing egregious loopholes that allow the wealthiest Americans in this country to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. If Congress could provide a multi trillion dollar bailout to Wall Street and foreign banks in 2008, we can and we must actually protect the pensions that were promised to millions of Americans. Next, the plan stops corporations from forcing workers to attend the mandatory anti the anti-union meetings as a condition of continued employment. That is, companies would be barred from requiring workers to attend those meetings. Okay, next, the plan will establish federal protections against firing workers for any reason other than just cause, quote unquote. In other words, employers won't be able to fire workers at will anymore. They will have to demonstrate just cause in order to fire workers. And he says he will sign a just cause law to protect workers and their constitutional right to speak out and organize in their workplaces. I think that also means, by the way, that no employer would be able to fire you in the future because that employer did not like your political activity. There are so many people now who don't participate in politics because they will think their participation would cause them to suffer in their workplaces, that there would be retaliation, and they want to avoid controversy. So they don't state opinions in public. They don't engage in politics. They're effectively barred from participating, in our democracy, except, of course, to vote, because they're afraid they'd be fired by their companies. Next, Bernie wants to create a sectoral collective bargaining system with wage boards to set the minimum standards across industries. When he's president, he's going to work with the trade union movement to establish a sectoral collective bargaining system. That sectoral system is going to set wages, also benefits and hours across entire industries, not just employer by employer. Further, under this plan, all cities, counties, and other local jurisdictions would have the freedom to establish their own minimum wage laws and guarantee other minimum standards for workers in their cities. So, in other words, in addition to the federal minimum wage laws, if local areas wanted to have minimum wage laws that were higher, or to have fringe benefits that were better than the federally mandated ones, the local jurisdictions would be free to do so. Bernie also wants to guarantee the right to unionize for all workers. He's going to ensure farm workers and domestic workers, historically excluded from historically excluded from the labor protections, are afforded the same standards as all workers, including the right to overtime pay and to join a union. He will enact a domestic workers' bill of rights to secure safe working conditions, collective bargaining, and a living wage for domestic workers. Next, he wants to allow for secondary boycotts. He says this plan will reinstate a union's freedom of speech to take action to pressure clients and suppliers of companies opposing unions. Okay, so in other words, if a company was simply one that was not going to negotiate with unions, was not going to have unions, and generally opposed unions, then it would be possible for a union to institute a secondary boycott involving pressuring the clients and suppliers of those companies. Bernie is viewing this as a matter, okay, of free speech. And I think he's right. Current laws that make secondary boycotts illegal, in my view, are unconstitutional. And this would be a wonderful thing for Bernie to do. Next, expand and update the persuader rule. This plan would require companies to disclose anti-union information that they disseminate to workers and provide for equal time for the the people who are doing the organizing to answer the information. In other words, they could oppose the propaganda from the employers with counter propaganda. This would include the funding of third party anti union campaigns. And he says this plan will also ensure that whatever contact information, email, phone, mailing addresses the employer uses is disseminated to the organizing agents. In other words, the unions seeking to organize. And monetary penalties would be enacted for failures to disclose. And next bullet point. There would be a fair transition to Medicare for all. Bernie will require that resulting health care savings from the union plans result in wage increases, okay, and additional benefits for workers during the transition to Medicare for all. In other words, when Medicare for all is signed into law, companies that already have health plans, okay, which were earlier negotiated by the unions, would be required to enter into new negotiations with the unions, overseen by the NLRB. Under this plan, all company savings that result from reduced healthcare contributions due to Medicare for All will accrue equitably to workers in the form of increased wages, okay, or some other benefits if the unions wanted, okay, some other benefits. Okay, so in other words, any company savings would be divided in some way between the workers and the employers. Furthermore, he says, the plan will ensure that union-sponsored clinics and other providers, okay, are integrated within the Medicare for All system and kept available for members. And he says, okay, unions will still be able to negotiate for and provide services that wrap around the Medicare for All services. They wouldn't be able to provide for services that are duplicative of the benefits which are established under the Medicare for All bill. But if they can think of wraparound services they want, then there's nothing in the Medicare for All Act that's going to stop them from doing that. Now, this part of the plan has been interpreted by some opponents of Bernie, okay, in Medicare for All, as saying that Bernie is advocating for changing the Medicare for All bill. itself that he's stepping away from Medicare for all. But it's clear from the wording of this that he's not stepping away from Medicare for all. He's just saying, if you already have some benefits but from the unions, okay, then if you have some clinics, okay, and some other providers, they're going to be integrated within the Medicare for All system and kept available for members. Also, if you want to negotiate for other services that would not be supplied under the Medicare for All bill, then you're certainly free to do so. Okay. Now, that doesn't change any of the benefits established under Medicare for All. They remain the same. It doesn't involve a change in that act. So it's not a retreat from Senate Bill 1129, the bill Bernie wrote. Maybe I should say, in Bernie's terms, the damn bill I wrote. Finally, the final summary of this. The plan says that to make it easier for workers to form unions is not a radical idea. 62% of the American people support unions. But according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the membership in unions is barely half of what it was 35 years ago. But 35 years ago was in 1984. But there's been a decline, okay, in membership, okay, in unions, I believe starting even in the 1970s. In order to reverse the 40-year decline of the middle class, we must strengthen unions and restore bargaining power to workers. And working together, that's exactly what we will do. So that's my reading and my commentary on Bernie's bill, except I want to add one more thing. Okay. This is a traditional plan to enhance the power of the unions, their growth, and their presence in our lives by taking away all the restrictions that had been placed on unions over a period, okay, of time. There are a few things that would enhance the unions that are not simply a repeal of oppressive things that have been done over the period since really the 1940s. Okay, but it's easy to conceive of a workplace democracy plan that would be more thoroughgoing, okay, than this. But for example, why not have something in the plan which encourages workers who want to come together to start new companies, to make those companies cooperatives, worker-owned companies. And for those companies that are already established and have been established in a capitalist mode, why not have laws that reproduce the code determination plan they have in Europe okay, and particularly in Germany, where a certain percentage of the board of companies that are public companies, in other words, that are on the stock market, okay, where a certain percentage of the board has to be occupied by people that are nominated by the unions that have organized by these particular companies. That would introduce an element of democracy at the corporate board level. And the co-determination has worked extremely well to protect the rights of workers, okay, in Europe, and could work very well to protect their rights here, okay, as well. And I think there should also be some more provisions here which would actually facilitate forming cooperatives that are worker owned cooperatives. Those could then be governed by democracies within the companies themselves. We know that at various times, cooperatives have been very successful. I think Bernie should be supporting a drive to greatly increase the percentage of companies in America that use the cooperative form, okay, of organization, bringing that kind of socialism into the workplace. We hear from Bernie all the time that he's a democratic socialist. And I believe he is. And I would like to see this reflected in his plan for workplace democracy. I don't think, okay, it is now. So I did want to say that, okay, as well. Now I'm going to turn to your comments, okay, and your questions. And to do that, I will go back to my other screen. Here we are. And I'll go check in with Facebook. I'm sure my screen will change in another minute. There we go. Okay. There's a little bit of a delay here. Sharon Anthony Connors says, I used to work in the retail merchandising business, and many of the companies classified us as independent contractors illegally. Yeah, I know that game. That means we got no insurance or workers' comp, even though we work dangerous jobs for long hours. Also, we got stuck paying self-employment taxes. And there was a comment also from Lynn Marie Baslivka, who says, "Hello from Charlotte, North Carolina, a right-to-work state." And Sharon Anthony Connor says, "I'd like to see employee-owned businesses. Why should we have to bargain with the capitalists?" Okay, so you've noted, I'm sure, the comment I just made, saying I thought, okay, that Bernie should be adding that to his plan, especially as a democratic socialist. Okay, any other comments or questions or remarks? I'll wait while you think about them. While I'm waiting, to share my please share, like, and subscribe screen. And I'm going to ask you to please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone, all in caps. And I appreciate any help that you can give me, however small, okay, it may be, however little, okay, it may be. And of course, I appreciate your coming and any likes and shares that you can provide for this video. Any more comments? Okay, while I'm waiting, okay, I'd like to announce that tomorrow night at 9, I'll be going over Elizabeth Warren's criminal justice reform plan. She released that, I guess, just a little before Bernie's plan, and I haven't had a chance to go over it yet. So I want to go over that with you and compare it to Bernie's plan as well. Okay, Sharon Anthony Connor says, I like the idea of having people appointed by the union to the boards of corporations, okay, or as members, okay, of the upper management, okay, of corporations. I think the first step is to get them appointed, okay, as members of the board, and to require a certain percentage, a percentage of the board to be people who are appointed by the unions and who are members of the unions. Now, it seems to me that perhaps 50% of the board members of these large companies should be from the unions. But if we had substantial progress, okay, in this respect, if it was 45% or 40% or even 35%, that would be a great advance. That would be a great advance. Okay, now I don't know about the union members actually going, okay, into an upper management spot. And the reason for that is that those same members would then be subject to role conflict, okay, because they would no longer be simply members of the union, standard kinds of employees, okay, of the companies, but they would be people who then got into to upper management and who would start to become acculturated to the kinds of work, okay, that the high level managers actually do, and their attitudes would change. In other words, inevitably, over a period of time, they would shift away from representing the interests of the members of the union to representing the interests, okay, of the upper management. Okay, so I don't know if that's a good idea. Other comments or questions? Further discussion. Okay, so just a few other words, okay, of a political nature while I wait, okay, for other comments. There's been a lot of commentary of late, which actually deals, okay, with Elizabeth Warren and whether people who are progressive think that that she's a progressive, okay, that Warren is a progressive. Uh, there are lots of people who self-identify as as being progressive who think, okay, that Warren is a progressive. Now, it's very visible, though, that at very critical times in her career in politics, that she has failed to do progressive things. For years, people had their eye on the fact that during the campaign, okay, of Bernie Sanders, she failed to endorse Bernie when she might have turned the tide, okay, of the nominating process in 2016, and that at the time she thought the process that was rigged, actually, for Clinton. But we never heard at that time that she had actually made a promise, along with a number of other female senators. And she made a promise that she would endorse Clinton during the election campaign of 2016, during the primary campaign of 2016. So, by not running herself and by not supporting Bernie Sanders, she was keeping a previous commitment that she had made to Clinton in 2013. But she never revealed that at that time. She kept it secret. It was secret until very recently. Okay, so uh, she was kind of going along with the idea, or made it seem, during the run in 2016, in other words, during the primary campaign of 2016. She made it seem as though she was free to support Bernie Sanders. She was less than honest with us at the time because she did not indicate that she had made a prior commitment to Hillary Clinton. She didn't want to get involved in essentially debating the idea as to whether she should have made, okay, a prior commitment. And of course, by the time she had made such a commitment, she was very familiar with the tactics and strategies, okay, of Hillary Clinton. And it also developed, okay, an opinion which had earlier come out that was really quite negative about some of the attitudes that Clinton had. And there were video records of that came out later. In certain situations, she absolutely excoriated Hillary Clinton. Yet, she signed the letter to support her 3 years before the primary events. Okay. She also, of course, has famously had made a promise that she wasn't going to take any corporate cash during the primary campaign. But she's also said that she won't be bound by that if she wins the primary. So, what kind of a progressive who's opposed to money in politics would say that kind of thing and practically make a commitment saying she will be taking the corporate money if she gets through the primaries and runs in the election campaign? It's as if she's saying to us, okay, I know that you don't want to vote for anybody who's taking corporate cash. So I'm not going to take any corporate cash now. I'm going to use you. And then when I win the primaries, I'm not going to need your loyalty so much anymore. So then I'm going to be free to take the corporate money. And I intend to do that. Now, I know she said that's because I don't want to unilaterally disarm. But I don't think that really changes things because the idea between not taking corporate money is that when you get into office, you will owe no favors to those particular donors. But of course, if she says she's going to take the money when she gets to the election campaign, then what she's telling us is that at that point, if we elect her president of the United States, she's going to owe favors to the donors. So, is that something we want? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have anything to do with that. And I don't think that position is a progressive one. There are dozens of other areas in which it's obvious that there are huge differences between Elizabeth Warren, okay, and Bernie Sanders. There are all sorts of hints of very big differences in foreign policy. Okay, that basically, when we talk about her and her foreign policy, that Warren doesn't intend to trim the military industrial complex at all. But when you look at the Green New Deal, okay, of Bernie Sanders, and you look at the $16.2 trillion that okay, is going to cost, and you see what he says about how that's going to be paid for, and recognizing that taxes and bond sales do not fund spending, and believing in that, actually, myself, very, very, very strongly. Okay. It's also apparent that to create the policy space he needs in order to spend, that one of the things that Bernie is going to do is to drastically cut the military industrial complex. Based on what he said, I fully expect that $750 billion budget is likely to be cut by half to 375 billion the first year out if he can possibly manage it. So I don't see Warren doing anything like that. I don't see any possibility of her doing anything like that. I think she's going to go along with the MIC for a long time to come. Okay. We also don't hear her talking about workplace democracy at all, do we? But that's a big item. Okay, in the Bernie agenda. So we cannot expect to get a revolution from her if she becomes the president of the United States. We might get an improvement in some of her situations, okay. But given the commitments she already has and the fact that she's evidently been courting certain of the bigwigs, okay, of the establishment of late, it's very unlikely that her version of the Green New Deal is really going to be something that we're going to be able to pass or that she's going to be able to implement, and that anything she can do to improve the climate emergency is going to be inadequate, and that it's quite likely that voting for her is just another form of accepting doom. Okay. But anyway, next time I'm going to go over her criminal justice reform plan. So Sharon Anthony Connor says, have you ever heard of Henry George or look him up? Not only have I heard of Henry George, but though some time ago, I have read Henry George. So I am familiar, okay, with Henry George. And Sharon gives us a link to the Wikipedia entry on Henry George. Since Henry George has written, there have been great changes in our industrial structure and in the organization of our corporations. Our societies have radically changed, but since that time. Some of Henry George's ideas on taxation are still very important, and they're popular in the MMT community. But I'm not sure I see the relevance of any views he might have had, okay, on workers being a part, okay, of management, but concerning the feasibility of that and those workers still retaining their identity, okay, as workers. I think what the workers need to represent them, okay, is other workers who are in touch on a day-to-day basis with the interests and the needs, okay, that workers have. And I think that means they have to continue to be workers. Sharon Anthony Connor says, Bernie is the only one who is tried and true to his ideals, values, and words. Says, I don't trust Liz Warren. And I agree, Sharon. Okay. I think I've said enough to indicate that I don't trust her either. And Lana Dell says, how does she poll against Trump? Well, in some of the latest polls, she's polling well against Trump, but we're still seeing the same pattern there. But Joe Biden is polling best against Trump. By Bernie Sanders is polling next best against Trump. Okay, and Elizabeth Warren is polling third best against Trump. To be specific, I saw a poll today. I think it was the latest one from Quinnipiac that showed Joe Biden now ahead of Trump by something like 54 to 38 by 16 points. Okay, in other words, a double-digit lead. Bernie Sanders slightly less, 52 to 38, a 14-point lead. Okay, and Elizabeth Warren had I think a 12-point lead. I believe it was a 50 to 38 lead, or something like that. In other words, just behind Sanders, 12-point lead as opposed to a 14-point lead. But all of the major Democratic contenders that the poll identified as including Harris and also Mr. Buttigieg, they all would win against Trump. And the margins, I guess, were pretty decent in every case, though they were the smallest for Buttigieg. I don't remember whether Andrew Yang was in that particular group as yet, but obviously Andrew Yang has been gaining in the polls. Teresa Sanders has joined, and she says, "Hi, Doc." Hi, Teresa. How are you doing? Nice to see you. Sharon says, there was a great documentary about him on Netflix or Hulu, can't remember. Him, I guess, is probably Andrew Yang, yeah. I think the neoliberals like him. You know, the neoliberals, okay, and the libertarians, they have a soft spot for him because he comes out of the tech world. And he's a great enthusiast, okay, of innovation. The general opinion that I have of him, oh, I see. Sharon was talking about Henry George and saying that the documentary on Netflix, okay, was about Henry George. Well, he does deserve to have a documentary, okay, on Netflix. A very important economist. On Andrew Yang, yesterday he was trashing Bernie on Twitter. Well, I wouldn't say trashing Bernie. He was disagreeing with Bernie, okay, on Twitter. But the things he said just indicated that he didn't know very much about the job guarantee, because what he said about the job guarantee was wrong. Yeah, I know the argument was the UBI versus the FJG. That is what they were arguing about. The comment that I usually have on that is, look, let's just have a federal job guarantee. okay, and then have a basic income guarantee, not a universal basic income guarantee, but a basic income guarantee for those who need it. Okay, now Yang says, the usual stuff about that. Well, that means it's going to be means tested, and you're going to have a bureaucracy in Washington, and you're going to have to go through, all this bureaucracy to administer the means testing and see that people are not cheating. I think, first of all, that's baloney. Okay, and the reason why it's baloney is because uh, if someone claims a big, then let them have the big. Okay, but at the end of the year, like everybody else, they have to file, their income taxes. Now, if they file their income taxes and it turns out that they've taken the big, but have earned a sufficient amount of money that the big is not their primary means of support, then just require that they have to give back the big. In other words, simply require that the IRS force them to give back the big which they took on false pretenses. Now that's very easy. We have the IRS; it's there. Okay, it's a bureaucracy. We don't need a new bureaucracy. We just need a new rule requiring taxation for those who took a big but who did not need a big. So that's it. It's not hard to actually administer it. Well, why have a big that's going to be based on need? Because if you do, then you'll be able to have a job guarantee for people who want to enter that particular program. And you'll also be able to have a big for people who need it that's pegged at 2/3 of the level of the job guarantee. So let's say you have a job guarantee that is cost adjusted, across the country, that begins, say, at $18 an hour, but is cost adjusted, across the country for cost of living. Okay. Then the $18 an hour corresponds to something like what, 38,000 a year or 39,000 a year or something like that, before the federal job guarantee, and make the big compensation but 2/3 of that. So 2/3 of 39,000 a year is what? So about 26,000 a year. So to make a long story short, a basic income guarantee of $26,000 a year for those who cannot fit into a job guarantee setting or who cannot work is a hell of a lot better than $12,000 a year. That is $1,000 a month. It's a hell of a lot better. And because the job guarantee exists, a much smaller number of people will be taking advantage of the big, than they would if we had a UBI. And look at the advantages of this. It's a better deal for people who are really in need. The people who want to work still have the freedom to work. Donald Trump and his sons won't be getting a universal basic income. Jeff Bezos won't be getting a universal basic income. I mean, it's a hell of a lot better deal, and it'll use up a lot less policy space than Yang's program will. I mean, with Yang's program, you're looking at $4 trillion in policy space, depending on how you structure it. In other words, if you've got 330 million people in the country, and they're all due $1,000 a month, then you're looking at something like $4 trillion a year. Now, Yang will say in response to this, he'll say something like, well, I didn't mean for children to have this. So it's only going to be what, 240 million people over 18 who are going to have this. But wait a minute. If it's a universal job guarantee, then why shouldn't the children have it? If you're stuck on the notion of a universal job guarantee, why should not the children have it? On the other hand, if you're not stuck on the principle of a universal job guarantee, then what's sacred about the principle of a universal job guarantee for people who are 18 and over? Why is that any more sacred than I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said a universal job guarantee. I should have said a universal basic income. Then why have a UBI? Okay, or why not have a UBI for people who are over 18 and who are in need? Okay, in other words, if you're going to limit a UBI just to adults in the first place, then why not limit it to adults who are in need? And give the people who are in need much more than they otherwise would have gotten. Give them $26,000 a year instead of $12,000 a year. In other words, what I'm telling you is I got a better deal than Yang. And my deal is $39,000 for the JG and $26,000 for the BI. And nobody's left out. That's a better deal than he's got, and it costs a hell of a lot less. It eats up far less policy space before we get to the inflation barrier. And so Sharon points out Yang is not polling that high, but he has a growing young crowd because of the UBI. I know the young crowd doesn't understand the UBI. In other words, they don't understand the alternatives, what some of the other alternatives could be. They're just focused on Yang's UBI. Okay, by the way, it's Yang and not Wang. Okay, which I'm sure you know, Teresa. anyway, Sharon said that she sent a video to Yang by Stephanie Kelton, and she gives the YouTube by Stephanie Kelton. Now, you could have sent him a YouTube actually by me as well. I have a number of them on the job guarantee. Maybe later. Okay, I'll leave a link. Now, the job guarantee can be absolutely revolutionary and a much greater expansion of freedom than the UBI is. And I think what we're talking about here ultimately is an expansion of freedom for individuals so that those who want to work can work and those who cannot or don't want to fit into a work situation can still have a reasonable level of subsistence, much greater level that they could have under Yang's program. And Sharon says, Yang supporters, if you go read their comments, think the FJG forces everyone to work for the government and cannot work at a job they want. Where are they getting this nonsense from? Well, they're getting it from popular comments in the press. They're not going to the Levy Institute and reading the materials there on the job guarantee from the people, okay, who actually originated the ideas for a job guarantee program. Okay, it's getting to be on the late side now. So I thank you for your participation and for the discussion. Okay, I think it was a good one, and I appreciate it. And I thank you very much for coming. And remember, I'll be back tomorrow, okay, at about 9 p.m. to do Elizabeth Warren's criminal justice reform. And I'll do my best to compare it with Bernie's criminal justice reform, okay, as well. So I hope to see you all then, as well as some of your friends who aren't here now. And Sharon Anthony kind of says, thanks, Joe. Please send me the links to those videos. I will, Sharon. I will post them here in the comments after the video, okay, is over. Okay. And Teresa says, good night, Doc. Yes, good night, Teresa. I think I'm going to flash my Patreon screen one more time, very briefly. And then provide my stream ending